Greg, can you just tell a little bit about yourself, kind of what you do currently?
Oh, so currently I'm a UCS project manager. So we're using we're using Zoom for the company I work for. I'm the guy, we do cloud hosted solutions, UCS solutions, right? So
Okay.
I'm kind of in a technical realm. I do the installs and the support. It's a company that's in like four states in the Midwest: Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico. So they're a copier company at core, growing into new technology realms. They had to manage network services. They needed somebody to take on the UCS Unified Communications buzzwords, right? Acronyms. Everybody in the world's talking about AI and UCS. UCS is basically a business's opportunity to unify their communications platforms. Your product is Zoom. We have a product similar to Zoom that's built into our platform. And so basically, that's what I do all day, right? Get people set up on phone systems, get them set up on the communication systems, shared files, meetings, stuff like that, and support it. So that's what I currently do. I'm a technical type person at heart. I've done sales, but really at heart, I'm a techie, and that's what drove me into photography, right? Took pictures as a kid, 110 camera. I think I've mentioned that in the thing, right? Did some 35 millimeter bulk loading way back in the 70s when I was in junior high. Kind of dropped photography as a whole for a long time. And when the technology started coming around, I think I don't think I mentioned this, but my first digital camera was something cheap from CompUSA, probably, like one of those little blister pack
Yeah, yeah.
ones. And this
Hey,
was had to be the mid 90s, and took terrible pictures. And I threw it by the wayside. I said, this digital photography is overrated, right? But right around the mid 2000s, early 2000s. I used to take my lunch break at a CompUSA, go look at all the tech, right? We all remember the tech meccas, CompUSA, places like that. And talked to a guy, and he told me about, man, I'm making a killing on stock photography. And I said, hey, that sounds fun, right? I just could stop everywhere I go and take a picture and make money at that. Bought a camera, started taking pictures, and pretty much forgot about the stock photography part of it and just fell in love with taking pictures, right? So
right,
that's
right.
where I am today, 20 years later, 20, after that moment, taking pictures and kind of reestablishing, redefining myself over a long
Sure.
period of time, know, doing this type of photography, doing that type of photography every year, trying to start a new project, right? Trying to say, what am I going to do this year? What am I going to concentrate on? But that's my
Sure.
start, right? Uh,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
technology got me into it. So,
Okay. And so, what type of photography do you do, or how do you view that?
so I consider myself a generalist, and I got that term from Rick Sammons. I've been watching and following podcasts since the very beginning. Frederick Van Johnson, Leo Laporte with TWIP, Derek Story with the Digital Story, Sharky James with Lens Shark. I followed these guys for a long time, and Rick Salmon used to come on a lot of the shows. He's a National Geographic Canon Explorer of Light, and you become a new person in photography. People want to define you. You go to a camera store and you get judged, and I like taking pictures of everything. I've flirted in a lot of different things, but Rick Salmon always described himself as a generalist, right? He doesn't limit himself. He takes pictures of everything. And so I always defined myself as a generalist, but I did mostly landscapes, right? I did landscapes, then started moving into other forms of photography. What really jump started me was the pandemic. I went the exact opposite route of a lot of people. I was like, you know what I want to do during the pandemic? I want to take pictures of people, something I hated doing for 20, 15 years. I don't know what made me say that. I don't know what made me want to do it. And I
Yeah.
think that was born during the pandemic. I moved into macro photography, right? Everybody's holed up in their house. I started doing studio photography, and flash photography was something I played with once or twice, got frustrated. I was like, I don't want to, landscapes are easy. Wait for the sunset, wait
Yeah.
for the sunrise, wait for a cool storm, go out to the beach, right? I lived in Florida at the time. It's easy to get landscape photography there, right? You live by the beach. During the pandemic, stuck in the house, started to set up a little home studio, bought a cheap flash, bought a better flash, started watching videos, Adorama videos, just anyone I could find with flash, right? SLR
Yeah.
Lounge. The guys at Anorama produce a lot of content that's free, right? You just go and watch the video. Pi Jersa adopt their things, right? And so I think that knowledge of flash, starting with still lifes, taking pictures of stuff right here. I'm in my kitchen. I'm in the little dining room off my kitchen. I'm at a
Yeah.
table. I'd set up a black backdrop here. I'd go buy fruits and vegetables, or I'd buy toys, Funko Pops. I did almost a whole year of nothing but Funko Pops, right? Or, a whole time period. But practicing with the flash built my confidence to say I could take pictures of people, right? That's not
Yeah.
so scary once I learned the flash. And so now I take pictures of anything, right? I'm participating in this year's 52 weeks challenge.
Yeah.
That's a great website, and it challenges you every week to do something different. And that's the key for me, right? Always pick a challenge, right? Try not to remain stagnant. So my challenge this year is 52 frames and more networking, right? Attending workshops. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So, and how I we met, I just want to disclose that it's just Instagram.
yep,
I've never met you except for today, right in person.
yep.
But your work, I don't even remember who followed who. I know I maybe I followed you first.
It
I
could
can't
be,
remember. But I was like, I want to be like this guy because no, I'm serious. Your work is just it's the best way I can explain it is tight. Like some of those pictures in Florida, and we'll show a few, but it's just tight. Like, and I when I look at photography as a therapist, to me, it's about emotion. And so when I view your work, I mean, it's just I sit with it for a minute, emotionally try to figure out what you may have been thinking or feeling and experiencing when shooting. So what hearing me say that about your work, what are you yeah, what's coming up for you?
So, one of the biggest hurdles that a lot of photographers are, people buy cameras, go out once or twice, take pictures, never show the pictures to anyone. When I started, I followed Trey Ratcliffe, stuck in customs. He was a big HDR photographer, and the idea of taking HDR pictures was big to me, right? And then I graduated, and for a year I wanted nothing but perfection, no post processing. A lot of those pictures in the middle of my profile of the beaches in Florida were ones where I was trying to get everything right in camera. But I see photographers try to give up on Instagram. It's like, hey, I've been posting, nobody's watching. So you have no idea how much this means to me as a photographer that somebody is giving me feedback on my photography, because as a photographer, that's one of the hardest things to get, other than the stuff that happens on Instagram where people beat you down, or you
Yeah,
think it's just a constant. My photography is not good enough. Like I said, you sent me out those questions, and one of them I basically said, I'm the type of guy, I don't think my stuff is good or great. I think it's acceptable, right? And that's how I think a lot of photographers feel. It's always a struggle. You always want to do better, or you're always learning something else. So it means a lot to hear that from someone like you, right? Someone on the outside saying, hey man, your photography is fantastic, right? So that means a lot to me.
yeah,
The therapy portion of photography means a lot to me too, as a vet.
yeah,
Basically, a lot of vets struggle with, things, and photography can help in those aspects, right? And, in
yeah.
other words, veterans, I would start a veterans photography program, if I could, right? If I had the time and
Sure,
the resources, right?
sure.
But I think that the VA hospital should adopt a creative photography program, right? Because I know it provides an outlet, right? Most guys like me, I was a staff sergeant in the Army, a combat arms unit, right?
Wow.
Being creative was not something anybody talked about or ever thought about, right? Decades later, I'm a
Yeah,
creative guy, right? I hang out with creatives. They're totally the opposite of,
yeah,
what you would think that somebody like me would hang out with eventually. But I love that crowd. I love people that are weird, I guess, or, people that think outside the box, right?
yep.
Break the rules, think
So
outside the box. Photography offers that to so many people. It's so easily accessible now. Instagram, phones have made people creatives that probably would have never thought about becoming creative. So
for sure, for
yeah, it
sure.
means a lot though, Gerald.
Yeah.
It
No,
means
that's
a
good.
ton for you to
And
reach out.
hearing your experience, again, want to thank you for your service. Both my dad and grandfather were in the army.
Yeah.
And so do have a question. When I did read that, I'm like, that's the first thing that popped out to me, it not believing or thinking that you are a good photographer. And so what that brings me to is trying to understand. I have a question about why people are so critical in terms of art. And I understand that there's the technical side of things, but why do you think people are so critical or beat people down related to something that's creative?
It probably comes from different aspects. One might be fear. So, established photographers who maybe spent their whole life learning something don't want to see someone be able to come in and just easily reach the same levels. Technology now has made a process so easy for people like me to be able to do certain things, right? So there's probably a fear of income, right? I don't do this for a living, I do this as a hobby, right?
Yeah,
And people see their markets to get saturated, right?
sure.
So if I'm a professional photographer, I'm looking for work, this guy comes into Instagram, starts posting pictures, obviously human nature, he might beat me down, right? And some people are just critical, right? In other words, um, that's one of the great things about 52 frames. It's like you can ask for what level of criticism you want, right? You can say,
Okay, yeah,
sock it to me, I want to know, or be gentle, right? I really don't care about what your opinion is. I can't explain it. There's internet trolling, it happens everywhere,
sure.
discussion boards, any subject. People get trolled. You just got to develop a thick skin, right? In other words, I know somebody's going to drop by and be like, this is off. I sold my photography in a street market for a while, and I was just describing to somebody today what that experience was like. You sit in your little booth. I got my pictures all lined up, put in sleeves, meticulously printed out. Two different types of people would come by. People that'd be like, that's a fantastic photo, walk away, right? Not how much does it cost. And the other person would be the person that would beat you down, right? Oh, your white balance is off, your focus was off, and is like, I gave up on that, not because of those reasons, but because, that just wasn't my jam, right? In other
Yeah,
words,
yeah,
I don't really care what people think about my photography in one sense, but I do in another. I do
yeah.
love constructive criticism. My recent work with the models, you've seen that I just did a model workshop, and that was a great workshop, right? Where I'm looking, the models are there. It's different than a paid shoot, right? I don't want to charge somebody, I'm not working for them. In other words, it's a collaborative type thing. So I'm getting feedback from the models. Hey, what do you think about this? Hey, Greg, the shadows are, I don't like it when the shadows are on my face. I love that type of feedback.
Right.
I love for people to provide that constructive type of feedback. Why people get so much animosity on the web, I mean, human nature, right? I mean,
Sure,
story since the beginning of time, right?
sure.
It's.
Yeah, no, for sure. And for me, it's like even on Facebook, beginner photography groups, you go there and just watching people just get, I mean, I just bought my camera, a couple months ago. I'm really trying to, and just getting ripped. And it's like, there's a difference, right? As you say, constructive versus just being critical just because and harmful. So that's why for me, even to have you follow me back and to comment, I mean, you comment or like, or that makes my day. It's like, man, this guy's taking his time to, and he's really, really good photographer, how I look at you. And I don't even mess with the groups anymore because of that. And watching how people just get discouraged and just leave. But to me, it is an art. It is something creative, something as a stress relief, for me. So kind of hearing you say some of these things just kind of solidifies, the importance of it. When you talk about veterans, the internship at the VA, and just understand how creativity, number one, there's vulnerability, but two, like the emotional impact of being able to do something creative. I mean, it just even tears me up a little bit, thinking about that. It's just such a benefit, I think. So,
Yeah,
yeah, man.
yeah. I always just tell people, just stick with it, just keep going, because you watch them, they'll post on Instagram, I don't feel like anyone's looking at my pictures. And it's like, it doesn't, just create to create, right? Find real successful creatives and they all have the same message, right? In other words, create to create, and your following will maybe eventually possibly happen, right? Like, I don't create for other people anymore. I create just for myself. And if you like it, that's great. If somebody else doesn't like it, that's fine too, right? And it's to each his own type thing,
Yeah.
but.
No, for sure. And that's why I like Rick Rubin. When I read Rick Rubin's book, Creative Act, it's like, yeah, create for yourself. It is vulnerable putting it out, but create for you and share you,
Yeah.
with the world or whoever your target is. But so a bit more about you. How would you just describe yourself just as a person?
Uh, at work, class clown. Like, they miss me when I'm not there, right? I mean, it's a strange thing, right? In other words, like, I generally don't socialize with a lot of people. I don't follow along a lot of social circles other than ones now in photography. But
Yeah.
I'm an easygoing guy, seen a lot, done a lot, and nothing to stress out about, right? Very low key, not very high stressed. I deal with problem solving every day, right? And you're not a good problem solver, by overreacting, right? But I always try to surround myself with people smarter than me. Always reach out to people smarter than me. Never act like I know everything, right? Take the approach. It's like, I always got something to learn. Someone always has something to teach me, right? So at work, I'm a loud talker. I love to talk. I love to have conversations with people. I have
Yeah.
conversations with strangers. That's one of the things I love about photography. You go to events, you go to places, and it's like, nobody's unhappy at these places. They've gone to these places too, and those are the type of events I go to, right? They've gone there for a certain reason, and it's like, you get to talk to people and interact with people. But I'm the type of outgoing type guy. If you came up to me, I'd always have time to answer your question, always have time to give you a helping hand, right? That's my philosophy, right? Do unto others, right? That's the rule.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, I'll say it again. I was like, man, this guy's cool, man. When I mean, you didn't even hesitate. I mean, you said, after holidays, but I'm like, wow. I told my wife, I said, he said yes, like, she's like, okay, but man, so I appreciate, again.
No, that's the way the world needs to be, right? And story from that one cosplay event I went to this weekend, I was shocked. So I don't know if you saw the picture of the pirate, the cosplay pirate. His name's Seven Sparrows. I didn't put it in my list. It's on my Instagram feed, but so I
Yeah.
was talking to him. We're doing our shoot, and I said, so after this shoot, somewhere down the line, how much would it cost for me to hire you to come and do a cosplay shoot somewhere? And he gave me a strange look. He said, Greg, I've been doing this for 6 years. No one's ever offered to pay me for this. In the photography world, there's a lot of, people don't move unless certain things happen, right? And that's on both sides, right? And that's everything. And there's a creative community, there's a community that does it for a profession, and they don't really mix, right? So you'll run into different types of people, identifying them, right? I know people got to make a living. I make my living doing something else, right? So
Sure.
people that make their living in photography, they're on one side, and people that are just creative hobbyists are on the side I'm on. And so, but
Oh, sure. And this picture is wicked. I saw the one, the Voice Studio Denver,
yeah.
uh, in the black costume, and I like that one. But wow, yeah, that,
So just to fill you in, those pirate pictures, you look at them, an established photographer would say the light's wrong, because I interjected the one light in Photoshop, so the shadows are off and the light's in a different place. But I'm being creative. It's my photo. I know it's wrong, but that's what I wanted. It was the best way to salvage a low light, photo. I wanted to make something for the guy that he could hopefully post on his Instagram page. So it's
right,
technically not correct, but I don't care.
right.
In that perspective, it was for a marketing campaign. If I was a pro and it was for some product, you'd want to get all the X's and O's. So I put that up there. No one's mentioned it, but I'm sure some photographers that saw go, his lighting's all off, and stuff like that. But that's fine too, right?
That's okay.
Yeah,
But what that even just did for me, I think that's the gift, man, that you give in your work, man. I'm
yeah,
serious. It's just like, okay, the guy is, he has that emotion, he has that light and it's shining. So, I mean, just being able to see those things, I think, again, that's the gift. That's, even having a rough day, I'll go to your page, scroll a couple minutes, a few other people, and just immerse myself in that. A lot of your photos too with the water and it's milky.
yes.
Like those are the things I'm like, okay, I want to learn that. And I'll save that and say, okay, next time I'm around that, I want to try to do this like Greg did it. So for me, I don't I mean, yes, I'm learning and trying to learn the technical things, right? But at the same time, I think what it does emotionally for people, man, is that's the gift, truly.
Yeah, inspiration, right?
Yeah.
I was inspired by someone. I looked at someone's photos and said, I want to, get photos like this, and learned, watch some instructed, tutorials and stuff.
Yeah.
That is my favorite subject matter since moving to Colorado, though. We love, my girlfriend's in the other room over there, but we'll go down. There's two big rivers coming out of the Rocky Mountains, the Pooter and the Big Thompson. And in the summertime, in the spring thaw, we love going down, and we'll just sit on the side of the river, and I'll set up, and try to get as many of those type of photos as I can. I'm still trying to get the big waterfalls, but I
Yeah.
love capturing moving water and extending that exposure, right, to get that flow.
Smooth. I'm telling
It's,
you. It's
it's like
like,
abstraction, right? It's like an
yeah,
abstract thing that occurs.
yeah, no, for sure. Um, so hometown. You said you moved around quite a bit, but how did that experience shape you just as a person? Like experiences, you moved around a lot, but how did those things, childhood experiences, kind of shape you now, just personally? Yeah,
So flexibility, right? You're an army brat. Every 3 years you move. Every 3 years you start over from scratch. It's not until you leave that system that you realize that's not how everybody grew up, because everybody else who was an army brat was the same way. Everybody's used to changing schools. Like I put in there, I went to 13 different schools as a kid, right? But that's, some people could see it as a minus, some people could see it as a plus, right? And then I joined the army, right? So
yeah,
I'm right back in that same environment. And so that, there's an advantage of maybe being in the same place for a long time. I don't know what, I didn't live that. I know the advantage that you can take from constant change, constant evolution, right? Constantly meeting new people,
yeah,
constantly having to make new friends, right? Every 3 years, you're starting from scratch, makes you so that you're easily to communicate with, I think,
yeah.
right?
Oh
In
yeah,
other words, you travel the world with your parents, and then you travel the world yourself. You meet new people. It's just, I think it made me super flexible, and the ability to kind of get along with anybody, right? In
yeah,
other
yeah.
words, go into a room, and I have to do this for my work a lot. I have to train entire school districts at a time, right? So you walk in to an entire gymnasium, and give them training. And it's a lot of people that would put them under the table, right? That nobody wants
Right.
to do that. Nobody wanted my job at my office. They gave it to me, but nobody to this day would. I'm like, I'm retiring in 2 years. Who wants this job? Nobody wants it. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's a lot of personal interactions, right? I have to, do stuff over the phone. So I think that helped drive that, right? The constant change, the
yeah,
constant uprooting and reseeding, throughout my entire life, having joined the army, staying in for 10 years after that. The first 30 years of my life, I was constantly in flux, right? Constantly moving, constantly meeting new people,
yeah,
going to
yeah,
new places. So
yeah. Well, I can tell, man. That's yeah. And I do. I think it just reminds me another book is called Range, talking about it in a different way, but being able to experience so many different things and not being just this, straight stuck in one space. Like even your photography, it's such a wide range, right? I mean, that keeps me interested. Personally going, I just wouldn't want to shoot one thing. I like range. I like to be able, and same thing with people. I like to be able to converse and connect with different people. So yeah, I definitely can see how your experience, led to that as well. So um So, what did you want to do when you were younger originally? What uh,
Be in the army. Yeah,
okay.
that was, growing up army brat. I mean, we, in the scouts, things like that. I mean, it was always my dream to be in the army, and I got
Yeah.
to live that dream out, right? In other words,
Yeah.
it was, that's just what I wanted to do, right? And then, after 1992, I got out, I was a staff sergeant. They were doing away with the weapons systems that I supported. It was after Desert Storm. They were downsizing the army. And I was like, I'm going to get out and get a job in the technical sector, and try something else, right? At that point, I felt like I had reached like an apex in the army, especially after a conflict, right?
Sure.
It's kind of like, maybe I should try something different, right? And,
Yeah.
it's not like if I fail, I could go back. It was like, I need to be able to say in my life that I did more than just that. And that's what I did. I got out, big change in life, right? Your middle, I was fixing to be 20, I mean, 30,
Yep.
and had a career for 10 years and just kind of went a whole different direction. And I'm glad that I did, in other words, could have stayed in for 20, got my pension and,
Yeah.
retired, and gone that route. But the fact, all the stuff that I've been able to do since then,
Yeah.
kind of, made me the person that I am. And so
For
perfectly
sure.
happy with that.
For sure. That's good. Did photography ever feel like it was would be possible for you to do the way you're doing it now?
With enough practice, anything's possible, right? And from a technical standpoint, it's like I know, you learn stuff. I know what my shutter speed should be. I know what my aperture should be. I know what the ISO should be. I know what I should do in these circumstances. Each one of those was a long process.
Sure.
With the long exposures, the first time I went out, I had a DSLR. I think I had a D5100. I didn't know to cover the eyepiece because on a DSLR, the light leaks down through the eyepiece. I'm taking long exposures at Fort DeSoto under the pier, and I'm getting this strange red light. I don't know what's going on. I got to go to the discussion boards, and it's like that's a mirror. The light's coming down through that view piece. They give everyone that piece in the camera. Nobody knows what it's for. That's what it was for.
Wow.
Mirrorless cameras, you don't have to worry about it anymore. But that was an eyepiece cover for long exposures. And every single step along the way with flash photography now, I still struggle with flash. I still struggle trying to get the right exposure, and using light the right way with flash. And that's what I love, right? It's a chance for me to learn. It's a challenge, right? And so I go to these different environments. I go to different scenarios. I try to research them, and I know approximately where I should start, but so many variables, and it's just the experience, right? Unless I go out there and do the shooting, I'm never going to learn. So that's
Yeah.
my learning process also this year, is more and more flash, studio, outdoor, mixed natural
Yeah.
light type stuff. So
Okay. Yeah. The Flash, I'm always a student. I mean, the name of the podcast, Eternal Student, which I, got from Bruce Lee, because I want to constantly learn. And even hearing you say some of these things, I'm learning. When I see you post and write what you do, I mean, I'm learning. I never want to be viewed as an expert, because I believe my experience is that sometimes when you think you know, you stop learning. Not always, but being able to slow myself down and recognize what you're saying and not getting like defensive. Oh, I don't know this, but no, I can learn from you and learn from what you're saying and those experiences. Um, I just think if more people had that, perspective, there wouldn't be so much of this like guarding or no, you have to do that, because even when I wouldn't have noticed you talked about the lighting on the cosplay shot. I'm just looking at it like, man, this is bad right here. So anyway, I just wanted to share a little bit about that. And at this point, I want to look at some of your photos if you're all right
sure.
with that.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm gonna have to switch over and share screen. But man, oh man. Whew. Let me get this right here. Um, Let me see if I can do. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah,
All right, let me look here. All right. So I want to look here at this one. Let's look here. All right, let's start with this one. Is that okay?
that's perfectly fine.
Okay. And so when you see this photo, what emotionally what comes up for you now, just in the moment?
So it's the urban, the urban, the grit, right? City dweller, right? The fact that you're like in an urban environment, hipster type stuff. Uh, Model was fantastic. Maya was the very first model I ever shot. This was my
Oh,
second shoot with Maya. She was
okay.
a fantastic model. I was a brand new photographer. I mean, the very first time I ever shot somebody with flash, it was the shoot before this one with Maya. We originally were going to go to a pinball museum this night, and the pinball museum was closed.
Wow.
So I said, "Hey, Maya, if you need, we can't shoot at the pinball museum. If you just want to go home." And she's like, "Oh, we can just shoot downtown Fort Collins." And so we were in a parking garage, and I noticed the light coming in through the back, and I like a high key look sometimes, that
Okay.
silhouetted high key look. She
Yes, sir.
dressed fantastic. She had on her rose colored glasses.
Yeah.
She was all set to do this cool pinball hall photo shoot, right? But she quickly adapted, and we just kind of walked around downtown Fort Collins, and this was a parking garage. And I didn't know how to pose anybody. She did all of her own posing. I mean, she was
Oh,
yeah. So, I mean, at this point, I don't know anything about posing other than what we learned from watching Tyra Banks on America's Next Top Model. That's the only I would regurgitate, Tyra Banks, be broken, give me an S,
that's funny.
So uh, Maya was
Yeah.
fantastic. She moved away from the area. I think she moved back to Austin. She was
Okay.
originally from Austin. We had
Yeah.
that in common. I was in the military in Central Texas, but she was living in a nearby town. She answered my ad. She was a super, super model to start with, right? That experience could have gone so wrong. My first
For sure.
experience
For
could have
sure.
turned me off from portrait. I could have been like, well, I tried, it's just not for me. But she was the very first model I ever shot, and that's why I will always probably choose one of her pictures to be my showcase for portrait, because it means that much, right?
Yeah, no, for
So
sure.
yeah,
And I'm gonna warn you, I'm not technical at all.
yeah.
But what I am realizing, or when I see this photo, that straight line at the bottom, right? And then coming like this just keeps her right dead center, like that focus. But I like how the lines, and I don't know if that even makes sense, but to
Oh
me,
yeah.
yeah, that's smooth, man.
So learn the general rules. Any advice to beginning photographers?
Yeah.
Learn the general rules and try to put them in every picture. And it sounds corny, and there's a lot of things, but I always look for leading lines. And the more you take pictures, the more you look for distracted backgrounds, the more you look for things. And so leading lines, that this shot was probably more, planned out, wasn't planned out like overnight planned out, but when we got
Yeah.
to the scene, we're looking, and I'm like, this converging lines would make a great picture, right? Get low. I'm going to blow the background out. I
Yeah.
had a vision of the best thing for me is I visualize it in my head first, and then I try to make it happen either in the camera or in post. I mean, you could see I had my flash, a cheap flash with an umbrella pointing at her from this direction to
Yeah.
light up her face, right? A
It's,
critique would be I didn't have a bounce or a flash on the other side to get even lighting, but I'm fine with that, right? That's what a
yeah.
professional photographer would critique. They'd say, half her face is in shadow. But if that was my intention and I'm okay with it as a photographer, I don't
Hey,
have a problem
it's
with it,
smooth.
right?
Yeah.
So,
And bounce, what you mean like the shield, that or
yeah, you could put another flash there. I didn't have
okay.
two flashes at the time, but I did sometimes carry around a white reflector, a little small reflector.
Okay.
Could have possibly had my girlfriend always travels with me when we're on these shoots. Could have had her hold that and try to bounce some of the sunlight or
Okay.
reflected flash into the other side of the face. But you've seen enough of my pictures
Okay.
now, Gerald. I love that half lit
Oh yeah.
look. That's just
Yeah.
what I
So,
like when I look at a
love it.
photograph. So
Love it. It's smooth, man.
yeah.
Love this. Okay, let's which one here? Let's go to Florida. Let's see what Florida. Ooh. Ooh. Now can we start with intent? What was the intent of this photo?
My intent in Florida on a daily basis was to watch the sky and hope that the sky would explode. So I lived, this was a little bit farther from my house, but I lived close enough to the beach I could make it there in 10 minutes. And the sky, people come on vacation just for this look, right? This one's not as colorful as most, but the monotone with the thing, I everybody loves a sunset, right? People come to Florida, they get addicted, especially on the West Coast. This is Clearwater. I lived in St. Pete.
Okay.
Uh, so sunsets, the beach is packed. There's hundreds of people. They traveled 1,000 miles to come and watch this one time in their life, maybe, right? I got to do this any chance that I made the time. I could come and try to take this picture as long as the sky cooperated. Every sunset doesn't look like this, but on the West Coast of Florida, you're going to bat 300, you're going to bat pretty good
Yeah.
with this, because this is what we were known for, right? The sunset on the Gulf of Mexico. And so I would go set up. And when I initially started to do when I initially started to do the beach photos,
Hmm.
there were people in my photos. I wasn't a long exposure guy right off the bat. I was just going out there trying to get a single shot with a normal exposure, but there's tons of people walking by. And I learned if I take a 30-second exposure, the people disappear. And so that graduated me all into this long exposure, smooth clouds moving. So that was by happenstance. I was eliminating people
Yeah.
from my picture and fell in love with long exposures and learned how to do long exposures, not to get that look, but to get people out of my picture,
There
right?
you
Because
go. Yeah.
they're on the beach, there's constantly people walking by. You do a
Yeah.
30-second exposure, the people disappear. So that was a side effect, was, this, this is a great spot, Pier 60 on Clearwater Beach. It's a super huge destination, right?
Yeah, man.
And people would,
Emotion. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, people would leave, Gerald. So being a Floridian, what I knew is people would watch the sun go down,
Yeah.
didn't realize 15 minutes later, this is what shows up. My sunset pictures are 15 minutes after the sun goes down. So you'd sit there and wait, you'd watch the people leave, and we'd sit there and be like, wait for it, wait for it. And when that refraction comes around the globe and creates all those crazy colors, that's
Sir.
where you hear the oohs and ahs, and the people would be like, oh, that's photoshopped, or that's, I mean, literally, if you've never had a chance to go to the Gulf Coast of Florida, this is not even spectacular, right? I mean, what you see in real life, I don't even think you can capture in camera, right? And it's just beautiful. And I did that for a long time. That was my bread and butter, right? That was my go-to, is like two lawn chairs, two folding chairs from Walmart, pack them up, grab my girlfriend. Hey, I see, I got good at looking at the sky. I think we're going to get a good sunset, right?
Yeah.
And even then, sometimes you don't get it, but I got to sit on the beach at sunset, right? So can't
Sure.
complain, right?
No. No. Emotion behind this photo when you look at it now.
So what I love about the ocean, I finished high school on the East Coast of Florida, did some surfing, the Atlantic Ocean, and what you fall in love with, surfers, beachgoers, is when you look out into the open expanse of the ocean and imagine what's happening out there. In other words, this has a pier in it, but that's for the photographic effect.
Yeah.
The water, when you look out, what I love about the beach is the openness, the unendedness of the water, right? You look out
Yeah.
there and the possibilities are endless, right? In other words, what that brings to my mind is, you're a seafarer in the 1400s, you can go as far as you want, right? There's
Yeah.
no limitations, there's no trees, there's no mountains, right? When I see this, or when and moving forward, what I love about open spaces in Wyoming, Colorado, is that same effect. People see nothing in that landscape, and that's one of my coming up. I'm going to try and do a project, maybe even this summer, is the bare landscape, the minimalist landscape, where you can just see forever without anything in it, right? No,
Yeah.
no, nothing from man, and that's hard to find in America, right? Wyoming's
Right.
sparsely populated. I'm lucky to live close to it. I see in the landscapes here in certain parts, like in Wyoming and Western Colorado, the same effect, the ability to look into the horizon. Possibilities are endless,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
What the world's your oyster, right? Whatever you want, you can make happen when you look at a scene like this, right? That's what I see, right?
Mhm. Okay. Any word, a word, emotion word when you look at this photo.
Oh man, the first word that came to mind was religious, but
Okay.
in other words, outside of religious, beautiful. I mean, that's
All
just the
right.
way, I
Okay.
see it.
We'll go with it. We'll go with it. First thing I recognize is that burst, that light. I love photos when that light just bam right here. Yeah.
And the key to this, Gerald's a wide angle lens, right? So people show
Okay.
up, kit lens, telephoto lens, you'll see and those pictures can look good too, but I was a wide angle guy. When
Okay.
I took this picture, I only had one lens. I'd upgraded my camera to a full frame camera. It was a Nikon D610, and I bought the 18 to 35. I didn't want any other lenses. I was a landscape guy.
Yeah.
Everything I shot was 18 millimeters to 35 millimeters, mostly 18 millimeters. The
Okay.
exaggeration, I love the exaggeration. You see that in some of my portraits. I get beat up for that. In the portraits using a wide angle lens, it's becoming more commonplace. Some people don't have a problem with it, but I love the exaggeration of scale, the exaggeration.
Yeah.
This is not what you would actually see because I'm exaggerating it with an 18 millimeter lens, right?
Yeah.
Three
Yeah.
times as wide as what you would see with your eye, right? So,
Yeah. No, that's smooth though. So for me, my one of my favorite words is solace. And there's a book, The Open Spaces, which they first started. I heard that from Yellowstone. Uh, and this is solace here. I would sit here in this spot and just watch. When you say endless, I would just watch that water and that sky. Kind of feel like they're like touching, So yeah, that would be my word. Love it, man. Didn't even just notice the people just now over
yeah.
here. All right. So, whoo. Okay.
So this is on a smaller waterway, St. Vrains Creek. It's outside of Boulder, Colorado. So I mentioned those two big rivers.
Yeah.
So when I first moved here, it was adventure, 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 right? I got to go find stuff to shoot, right? I need to get some photography back in my life. You would never even know this was there. You would drive right by it on the road, right? You're going through the mountains. This part is not as much as the other ones where the Rocky Mountains are real high. This is like a narrow creek. There's a little cutoff. Obviously, people there know it's there, so there's been a path broken out there. And I didn't have my camera when I discovered it. I think me and my girlfriend were just out taking a drive, and it's like, oh, this would be cool. I need to come back here with my camera, do a long exposure, right? I've been back there 3 times, and I'm only happy with the very first one I ever took.
Oh, wow.
So, you go back and you try to do better, and I get a different perspective, but this is the first one I ever took there. It was a D610 with an ND filter. You're on a rock. I mean, it's so cool. There's big rocks everywhere. The scale, like what you don't get on these pictures of rivers in the Rocky Mountains, and the size of these rocks is like if I was standing in the middle of that puddle, I
Hmm.
could fit in there, right? In other words, these features are much larger in real life than you can make. I learned that the scale is completely off. Like you think this might be like a small little runoff or something. This water, you could swim in that little pond there.
Wow.
So yeah, the scale. First off, the scale in real life is a little bit bigger. So the feeling you get when you're in this little alcove in the mountains, mountains on both sides, you're like in a fortress, and there's this water that's carved through this canyon for thousands, if not millions of years, right? And
Yeah.
this didn't happen overnight, right? This particular little water feature took hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of years to form, right? In other words, this is a creation, right? This is a creation and it's beautiful. And when I milk out the water, it shows, the chaos possibly that's,
Yeah.
down inside of there. But I love the smooth water. These pictures make me feel good. This is my bread and butter. If I'm jonesing, it's like, let's go into the mountains. Let's go find some water. I don't need to get this picture anymore. I could find a new place, but the idea of finding another little spot like this somewhere in the mountains, at some point, that's what makes me take the long drives on a Sunday.
Yeah. No, for sure. Um, and anything like a technical, anything technical, if me, I don't know how to do this, right? And so, what is the technical? You said the ND filter. If you can just yeah, a little bit about
Sure.
yeah.
Sturdy tripod, good shoes. You don't want your stuff falling in the water. That happened to me as soon as I moved here.
Uh-oh.
Very slippery. So very sturdy tripod. Watch your footing, right? Get
Yeah.
your camera positioned. Don't extend, try not to extend the legs as much as you can. Find a nice sturdy spot. And you're going to use, so I'm not a big fan of the neutral density, the variable neutral density filters. I used to carry around kits, an ND, 1000 or a 10 stop filter all the way down to a 3 stop filter. So, the higher your f-stop, the less of an ND filter you need to use. So a camera
Okay.
with a good low base ISO, this was the D610, I think it had a 100 ISO as a base ISO, right? You're going to set it to the lowest ISO. This is probably an f16 plus or minus on that, right? I set that up. I don't worry about, they'll talk about diffraction and things like that. My intent is to get this nice long exposure.
Yeah.
So then at that point, I don't do the math. I'm too lazy to try to, you'll hear guys do the math. Okay, this is this filter. I carry around a kit of like 3 or 4 of them. I stick one on there and it's like, okay,
Right.
that's too dark. I stick one on there, that's too light. Okay, if I can't find something in between, then I got to adjust my settings. I may have to go up in my ISO, down in my f-stop,
Yeah.
right? Change my shutter speed. So the difference between the water that's flowing in this creek and the water on the beach, these creeks, the water's moving real fast. So you can't go
Okay.
30 seconds. It'll just be all super white foam, right? So
Okay.
if you're used to shooting a 30-second exposure, you may want to come down some. So when I go out now, I try to stay between 3 and 6 seconds, especially during spring, fall. The water's moving so fast to get what I like in the water is a 3 to 6 second exposure. So then I do the math around that, right? And I've
Yeah.
tried some new variable density filters. The ones from K&F are pretty inexpensive.
Yeah.
Uh, but I find that the solid ones just perform better. They don't move. You don't get weird X's. There's a lot of downside. So I don't buy the expensive ones because I wear them out. And I found these brand called Ice from a photographer.
Ice.
Yeah, they don't make them anymore, but that means
Oh,
you can buy them on Amazon for cheap.
okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, ICE, those are the most neutral color balanced filters because that's when you're using an ND filter.
Okay.
It's the color balance, right? So you're shooting in raw
Yeah.
because you're going to want to tweak the color balance, right? You're going to want to change the white balance on it. So find the most neutral, density ones that fit your budget, right? You can go anywhere from thousands of dollars. I followed Peter McKinnon for decades, and watched him get his Canon Explorer of Light. I mean, I don't know the guy personally. I just know him from YouTube, like millions of
Yeah.
other people.
For
He came
sure.
out with his own brand filters. I wanted to buy them. They're $300. I just don't have $300 or $600. I don't do this for a living, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I tend to lose stuff or stuff tends to break on me or whatever. I don't have $300 to throw down the, whatever, fall off into the water or whatever. So I look for affordable ones. I don't go 100% cheap either. I learned that lesson. The
Yeah.
cheapest ones are never the ones to get. You want to find a good balance, right? And I can tell you, I probably took this with an ice filter. I use those for decades. I've been trying the K&Ns now because the ice got hard to find and they wear out, and they rust or they just get corroded. But if you can
Yeah.
find ice filters, they're great. Balanced ones. I mean, you can experiment yourself with different ones. I always get the ones. I always try to go from like 3 to 1,000. There's, or 6 to 1,000, something like that, right? I'll have a 64, a 1,000, or a 10 stop, a 6 stop, and maybe like a 3 stop or a 4 stop, and then I just move my settings around, in between one of those three, because I'm also lazy, because now I might have hiked to this spot. The rest of the stuff's out in my car. If I didn't bring my bag, I don't want to change my filter.
Yeah.
I put this filter, I'll put another one in my pocket, right? And I don't want to walk all the way back to the car. So I just kind of experiment. But this is
Yeah.
definitely one of my most successful water pictures. So,
Yeah. But you make it work, man. I'm like, I
yeah.
could stare at this for an hour, just everything, the texture, just how things moving. My favorite piece is right here, right? Like coming right down.
Yeah.
This one right here, man. It is, yeah.
And say you're going to Tennessee to shoot waterfalls, you don't have any water to practice with.
Yeah.
Practice with traffic.
Okay.
I went to the McDonald's for dinner and shot something for 52 frames, on the corner by my McDonald's, right?
Oh,
So
that,
you can
yeah.
practice the same technique, in the daytime with an ND filter with traffic, right? In other words, practice the long exposures using traffic. I mean, I guess you could turn your water spigot on at home or find a local fountain, right? Because
Yeah.
this is not easily accessible to everybody. Somebody might plan a trip to go shoot waterfalls or something, right? And don't have anything to practice on,
Yeah.
right? To try to get it. So,
Yeah. No, I'm planning a photography trip here, I think in June or July out in Oregon. I mean, I'll be going to Tennessee the end of March. I'll try to find where I can, but yeah, man, this is a beauty right here, man. Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Emotion.
This one's serenity for me. The,
Mm,
the the sounds of the forest,
yeah.
the flowing water. You're usually out here kind of by yourself. You're in the
Oh,
middle of nowhere, right?
wow.
You're in the mountains. This is definitely, serenity, right? John Denver, Rocky Mountain High, type thing. In other words, this puts you into a whole different place, right? Away
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
civilization. Not that I don't mind civilization and urban shots, but escapism, right? I could sit here in a lawn chair for an hour, right? And we've done that before on the Poudre River, nice little pull outs where you can go and you'll see other people doing it, right? Watch a fisherman or something. But this is the epitome of serenity right here, right? Because it's like a white noise generator too, right? People buy white noise generators. This is a
Yeah.
natural
Yeah,
white
yeah.
noise generator,
Okay.
the water falling. So,
Just peaceful,
oh
from
yeah.
wow. Yeah, man. That is nice. Okay, we got one more. Bam. Ooh. Intent. What was happening here? Woo.
I love telling this story. So I made a print of this and brought it in. I work at a copier company and sales reps wanted to start using it for their demos. But the inspiration was, I was at home, where people aren't going outside, you're looking for projects to shoot. I was following this photographer on Instagram and he was shooting models, their faces with paint dripping over them. And I was like, I want to recreate that, but I don't want to put a model through that, right?
Yeah.
So I got the idea of going to my local hobby store, painting it black and using cheap acrylic paints from Dollar Tree or, from the, just cheap paints and pouring it to try to duplicate what this guy had done in these pictures. First attempt, I bought the wrong spray paint. The styrofoam head melted.
Oh, shit.
Right. Second attempt, I bought the right spray paint. I painted the head in the parking lot, brought it in on the. I actually did this first one in the living room on the carpet. Big mistake. It all fell over, ruined a spot in the park. I did subsequent ones on the kitchen table on a
Yeah.
hardwood floor. But anyway, lessons learned. I love this shot because this was me learning flash photography. So you can see the grid.
Yeah.
My softbox to the right of the picture, you can see the grid in the softbox. On this one, I probably did have another flash. It
Okay.
was, shot with a black background. I got a collapsible black background. I put in the back, but because I'm using flash, you could pretty much have anything as your background if you make the picture the first shot a totally black picture and then add the light, right? That's what I learned from a lot of really good photographers on YouTube, right? Start with a black picture, add your light, and I started taking pictures, started saying, well, I'll do this. And then I started adding colors. And, I'm just sitting there taking pictures as this drips, and initial drips. This is probably mid drip until one was completely covered. I love this picture. I later found out that guy was not photographing models with paint. He was using AI. His pictures were on display in museums overseas. I mean, he was very famous for this technique. You could probably find him. And I don't have a problem with that. I'm an AI guy. I make stuff in AI every day. I
Yeah.
don't have a problem with it. I don't know if he ever proclaimed they were pictures or people just assumed they were pictures. This
Wow.
was, 4 years ago, four, five, man, it's 2025, 6 years ago, right? I mean, it's been a while. It's so uh, disappointed. Well, I'm glad that I was able to replicate his shot in reality. And now I
No,
always put a
yeah, that is,
disclaimer,
man.
yeah, on the shot. This is not artificial intelligence. This is, $20 worth of stuff from a hobby store. Anyone can do it, right? And so
Well, this is
uh,
my next project, man. I'm gonna send it to you. I'm gonna show you. It'll be whatever, but this right here. This, yeah.
I love it. It's one of my favorite still lifes. I don't want to do it again. It's a huge mess, right? uh, I don't want to. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of meticulousness. It's a lot of paying attention to detail, right? I did this 3 times. I got it best on the second attempt. The third attempt, I couldn't do. Sometimes you get a shot and you're just never going to get a better shot. You can
Sure.
try, but you're never happy with it, right? You try something different. I tried painting the head blue. I tried using fluorescent paints. They just didn't look as good as this shot. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
No. And what is this? You said acrylic? This is acrylic?
I bought paints from different places. These
Okay.
were probably the tube acrylic paints from Hobby Lobby or Michaels.
Okay. All right, man. This shot is just I
Not
can't
expensive. Don't buy the
see.
expensive paints. Buy
Yeah.
the cheap paints. I mean, you got to get it while it's wet. And I didn't save it. I threw it away. I didn't let it dry because it was all covered in. I threw sprinkles on it, and I can show you some of the disastrous behind the
Yeah.
scene pictures. I thought, well, I'll throw some sprinkles on it, and then it fell over, and I took pictures of it falling over. It's crazy when
Yeah,
you
I'd love
see
to
what it
see it.
was. So it's a
Yeah.
piece of styrofoam that planters use. So in Hobby Lobby, they'll have the
Yep.
green
Yep.
styrofoam that you jam plants in. And then it's a sewing needle from Dollar Tree, my local Dollar Tree, like a long crochet needle.
Okay.
And that's a styrofoam head just punched down on the styrofoam needle. You got to buy Hobby foam safe paint. And they have that in Hobby Lobby and Michaels. You just got to look for it. That's
Mm.
probably the most expensive piece. The head was like $297. So
Okay. That's sweet, man. Um, any more or anything like technical you would want to add about this shot?
don't attempt this one till you practice a lot on fruits and vegetables. And I went through a whole thing trying to do beer bottles, glasses, Powerade bottles with
Yeah.
sprays and reflective surfaces. And uh, this one was probably one of my most technical. I want to say there might have even been a third flash behind the head.
Okay.
I didn't take a picture of my setup. I can't exactly remember.
Yeah.
I just know I had my softbox with the grid. My biggest flash is a Godox 8100, and then a Godox, uh, you know, on camera type flash, but it's off camera using the same remote strobe, the same remote. And then I think I had an older flash that's triggered by the flash in the background to try to give it some 3 dimensionality, right? Give it some flash from behind. So this took a lot of effort. I don't like making a lot of effort, but I think the effort was worth it, right?
It was well worth it. Look at this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last, just emotion. What comes up for you?
Probably frustration and exuberance, right? Because you take the pictures, you see them in the viewfinder. For me, this was a technical achievement, right? I will
Yeah.
always consider this until I take a better shot. So discipline.
Yeah.
So to make a shot like this, you need discipline, right? You need to pre-think the shot. I thought about what the guy was making. I thought, how could I replicate that? Right. There was no list of items on Pinterest to go and grab and set
Yeah.
up. Right. I looked at his art and I said, how could I duplicate his art? So there was amount of discipline and planning in that, right? In other words, oh, I'm going to need something like a head. Did the research, found these cheap styrofoam heads. It's not going to look good white. I think I might have even tried one white. There's no contrast, so I gotta get it dark. Can I buy one black? I'm gonna end up painting one black. I think I found some black ones in some kind of mannequin store.
Yeah.
Too expensive, right? This is just a weekend project, so trial and error, and basically being familiar with my flash, getting the exposure what I wanted, right? In camera. So
Yeah.
a discipline would probably be the what I would say,
Okay.
even though it's chaos.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, it's excitement, right? Being able to try. I love learning, will always learn. And so this for me is excitement. And, again, it's what this podcast is about, is really just trying to understand and not being an expert, but listening to you. Yeah, we'll do that and try with the fruits and veggies. But I'm gonna aim for this, man. This one of the best ones I've seen in terms of a picture. Like this. It's just, I don't know. I'll write to you probably later after I
Try to put your own spin on it, right? I mean, you could try
serve it.
to duplicate it, but I never get, so I
Yeah,
do get satisfaction when I try to replicate, like I go to the Grand Canyon, right? Everyone
sure,
can get the same shot. Horseshoe Bend on my bucket list, right? You got to work with what you got, right? So you try to duplicate it. But with something like this, you can add your own
for sure.
creative element, right? Maybe change something about the equation to
Oh
make
yeah.
it your own, right?
Oh yeah. No, for sure. 100%. Yeah. But
I mean,
that's
you can copy. You can if it's better, post it up there, right? We'll give you.
Oh man, I can't. Yeah, right. No, no, no. There is no way.
Yeah, you can. Anyone can make this picture, right? So
I mean, okay, I'll take that, but what I am gonna say is no. I'm gonna try with the paint, but nothing like this. But I just want to just the concept. Yeah, there's no replicating this in my opinion.
yeah, I couldn't do it on the third attempt. I mean,
Yeah,
something about this way. I was layering the paints, putting some blue, putting some red, putting some yellow.
the drips,
Right?
those is right. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, that's smooth, man.
yeah.
That's good. So, all right, I'll stop this here. And so, coming to a close, man, I'm gonna give you three words and just there's no rules. It'll just be my kind of view of without saying what, but of our time together today. And so I'm just gonna give you the three words. You can use them how you want to. You can just say what each word means to you or not. You can just come up with something. The first one is depth. Okay. The second one is blur. And the last one is story.
Okay. So when you said depth, right, the first thing I that came to mind was build yourself deep, right? I'm a generalist. Even if you want to be just a portrait photographer,
Yeah.
experiment to all genres, put depth into your toolbox, right? If you're a Chevy mechanic, work on a Toyota occasionally to get experience on seeing how somebody else did it, right? Knowing how somebody else accomplished something helps you do, even if you only want to work on Chevys, working on a Toyota occasionally will help you get a better understanding of that. So when you said depth, I instantly thought about in photography with me being a generalist and me trying to branch out to other arenas, even if I retreat back to being just a landscape photography when I retire and I just want to go shoot national parks, right? I have
Yeah.
the depth and the knowledge of a well-rounded photography experience. So depth is keep pushing into the soil, right? Grow, put your roots in deep, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
uh, blur,
Yeah.
blur the lines. Don't, I'm a big believer there's rules, and I'm a big believer in breaking the rules, but knowing the rules first. And a lot of photographers have said that, but I definitely believe that, right? Know the rules, understand the rules, but for all heaven's sake, don't follow the rules. Be the guy that they're like, why did you do that? And then be able to explain to them, well, I did that because I was trying to do this. I love when I take a picture weird and people are like, oh, yeah, her foot's the size of a house, her foot, the perspective. And then I see a picture that somebody else took that becomes famous, and they took that picture, and it's like, yeah, I had that idea myself, right? So blur the
Yep,
lines,
that's right.
don't feel like because everyone's telling you you have to shoot at f8 or you have to have a lens that shoots at 2.8 to be a portrait photographer.
Yeah,
Blur the lines. don't
yeah,
don't worry about those hard set rules that a lot of photographers are going to tell you to
yeah,
follow up.
for
And
sure.
man, what was your last word?
The last word was story.
Story. Took me a long time to do this, and I still don't do it.
Hmm.
I'm a technical guy, and so there's a technical accomplishment, and those are the pictures that nobody wants to look at, right? Or other photographers may want to look at how did he do that, or the technical perspective. But if your photograph tells a story to a certain person, that's more valuable than having it correct. Some of my most successful photography when I lived in Florida, I took pictures of a this lady's properties, just as a project. I picked up a project. I want to document these older buildings in downtown St. Pete, right? She found them and they were her properties. And she was so moved by that. She became a good benefactor of my photography, person. Hey, check this guy out. Two of my pictures still hang in one of her buildings in the elevator lobby, right? And I'm super proud of that. In other words, uh, people might not like the photos, but I like the photos. She liked the photo. I like the fact that those photos meant so much to her because she had invested her whole life in this property business that she did, where she preserved older properties, right? Instead of mowing them down and putting up new condos, she went through a preservation. It's Marianne Lynch. Doubt she's ever going to hear this podcast.
Never know, man.
But her name is Marianne Lynch. She runs Times Square Properties in St. Pete. Uh, she became a huge benefactor, and that taught me the lesson that the best photography you're ever going to do is the one that means the most to somebody, even if that somebody's you. Take a picture that means something, right? The meaning behind the photograph is the real
For sure.
key, right? I mean, we can walk through all the steps, and I do that. I'm a technical guy, so I'll take on a project and I want to be technically perfect. Picture means nothing to anybody. It gets 3 views or something, right? And it's not like we're trying to satisfy people, but when photographers wonder, like, why didn't people like this picture? It was way better than everybody else's pictures. Like, did it tell a story? Did it resonate
There you
with
go.
somebody? Did it have meaning to you? Because if you take a picture that has meaning to you, I'm sure somebody else is going to find meaning in that photograph too, right? Like you found in mine, right?
Yeah.
You
Woo.
know, I found someone who loves my photography. We got a
Every day,
party of
man.
one, Gerald.
Huh?
We got a party of one.
No, there's no way,
you
man.
know so
No.
put meaning in anything, whatever you're doing, right? So, but especially in photography, right? This
Yeah,
is a photography based discussion, and if you find a way to put meaning in your photos, you will excel faster than someone who's trying to get the correct exposure, right? Tell a story.
that's it. That is it. Appreciate you, man, coming on, and hopefully you'll do it again.
Oh yeah,
This is the second episode. Had to be you, man. So that was it. I appreciate it.
thank you so much.